Hello, and thank you for joining us for the May 2026 session of From the Bench Virtual Studio Tour Series. My name is Chad Johnson, and I'm the studio director here at San Francisco Center for the Book. Today, we're happy to welcome Quinn Keck as our guest artist. Quinn is a multidisciplinary artist who investigates concepts in sociology, physics, technology, mathematics, and philosophy. Working across artist books, printmaking, creative coding, and installation, their work discusses memory, perception, and grief through questioning the manifestation of systems. In their work, constellations of hand-cut shapes, equations, and symbols expose hidden layers of their worldview, and a taxonomy of icons creates webs of virtual spells and spirals out of research. Through the building of new worlds, they look beyond the arithmetic to dissect the axioms that define what is rational, logical, and default. So, with that, I welcome Quinn.
Yeah, thanks, Chad. Let me share screen. Okay, awesome. So hi everyone. I'm Quinn Keck, and I'm a bookmaker, printmaker, and multidisciplinary artist. My printmaking practice currently primarily focuses on letterpress and monotypes, and my artist books use their form and layers to talk about the stories behind concepts, as Chad said, in philosophy, history, math, and physics. And I like to think of each book as a creation that both furthers my own understanding as well as adding a collective pursuit of knowledge and craft. I started learning letterpress in 2023 and started out like with most people with handset type. And many thanks to the places I learned at, the Cylinder Core program here at SF Center, the book was really helpful, as well as in Cahoots and the Aesthetic Union. And the Daredevil setup on the top right was one of the first I ever did. And Macy in Cahoots was kind enough to indulge my desire to do curve type despite never really having set hand, straight type by myself. Ultimately, in my practice, I found polymer plates to be an exciting way to use my drawings and kind of build up this taxonomy and be able to create kind of like overlapping images that translate to both prints and books. And with my books, I'm ultimately kind of interested in expanding beyond the 2D plane to kind of make the point or create something. So this book, for instance, is made with letterpress prints on Swarthmore and vellum, and then it's cut out and folded and manipulated so that the viewer encounters the tiny question, where is your gaze, from multiple perspectives. This is my most sculptural work to date. It's an artist's book about the cemetery removal in San Francisco, and specifically how the Legion of Honor is built on top of the working class cemetery, city cemetery. And so each of these kind of like acrylic panels that create the three-dimensional Legion can be taken out and read individually. They all have drawings and quotes from people who are either speaking out against cemetery removal when it was happening, or in the present day, working to make SF's cemetery a city monument, which groups of community organizations and individuals were able to make happen in 2022. And even though this book is acrylic, I think it really highlights the ways I think like a printmaker and how that comes across in building the images through many layers. I really strive to combine form and function enabled in order to tell new stories and open up perspectives. So this book was kind of conceived and the pages printed while I was at residency at Women's Studio Workshop in Rosendale, New York, and which explores the historical ties between witch hunts, colonialism, and capitalism on 13 triangle-shaped pages. And as you might have guessed, or if you know me, the book's dimension and pages all have significance. When trying to think about how to put such a vast, wide topic into like a single book, it was really helpful to use like my associations with numbers and draw on like tarots or other things to figure out how to lay out and organize the book. And then so each page like has text, like the image pictured here. And then there's also like a kind of like next step and a whole Google Doc of resources for people to follow if they're interested. And ultimately, I hope this book inspires readers to question the differences between slogans, sentences, and spells, and really just examine the narratives that shape their reality, regardless of their own relationship to witchcraft. And then card shuffling and divination has been something that's always fascinated with me. I had like a friend who that was like kind of how we connected. And when I moved to San Francisco, we used to do like kind of virtual tarot polls in order to like kind of just catch up and like connect when we hadn't seen each other in person a lot. So kind of naturally that wound up with me making books with cards and decks. And so the deck on the right has been available at the SF Biblio shop and has gone through kind of many iterations in many different forms. But all of them contain quotes that changed my worldview from people who fought for our collective liberation. And my favorite kind of like one sentence definition of collective liberation, though it's a very vast topic, is freedom for all groups, recognizing that oppression is intersectional and that all our oppressions are tied together. And then these decks have kind of expanded towards participatory pieces that explore ritual. So these are a few examples from over the years. And in these, I kind of led people in various ways, sometimes speaking in front of them, and then sometimes having slightly more like asynchronous activities. But in all of them, people drew from decks I created and or left their own quotes that shaped their worldviews or otherwise inspired them. And then the latest or like most recent version of this is an artist book called Words as Spells, Spells as Words. And it's an oracle deck. So if you are familiar with card pulling, a lot of times people are going to think of tarot decks. And so the only difference really is that an oracle deck doesn't have any like predetermined suits or arcana. And tarot decks I love and I'm making for small plates. So definitely have an attachment to. And they're definitely what I first encountered and pulled cards from. And starting out, I didn't really question like where the tarot came from or why these suits and why this order. And often any guidebooks that are to help you to like interpret the cards treated the structure of the tarot as kind of a given and not really providing any historical context or reason. So naturally, that got me pretty curious on how this came about. So if you're doing like just a preliminary Google search, or if a guidebook does happen to include any history, there's common tropes, including things like tarot was just a game before it was used for divination, and it's just directly from playing cards, or a tarot was an invention of Italian or French nobles. And the Visconti Sorofa deck pictured here is one of the oldest preserved decks we have, and it's very like ornately fine printed cards that belong to the wealthiest Italian family in Renaissance Milan. It was commissioned by the Duke Visconti and then his successor, son-in-law Francesco Sforza, around the mid 1400s. And then the kind of other most common thing would just be attributing it all to Arthur Edward White, who wrote the Rider-Waite Tarot deck and popularized it. And most of the time when people are thinking tarot, they're going to be thinking these images because it's everywhere and basically just kind of chalking it up to all modern decks are just riffs on this. And then in actuality, with like most things, the histories of the tarot are much more complex and don't really fit in a nice, neat timeline like this. So, for instance, all playing card decks with four suits and court cards are actually derived from Olmec decks created in the Olmec Empire, kind of around the 11th and 12th century. And the Olmec Empire covers modern Egypt, Cyrus, Palestine, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria, and parts of Turkey and Saudi Arabia. And while European nobles did create tarot decks like this one, those ideas didn't come out of nowhere. The Roma arrived in Europe around the same time tarot decks appeared in Italy and kind of everywhere. And the Romani people, both historically and in the present, have been met with lots of persecution. So fortune telling was one of their survival traits, very much not just like a fancy parlor game. And still, even to this day, their culture is rarely acknowledged and their oral history is dismissed. And even sometimes, like modern day tarot readers will try to distance themselves from fortune telling and claim their practice is all about intuition and spirituality. And for more information, please check out like the work of living Romani authors, like the Secrets of Romani Fortune Telling book above. And then while European occultists did publish many books like The Unknown World, and that's a lot of the source tech we have, they definitely didn't cite all their sources. And Rider and Wade are actually the names of the author of the guidebook and the publisher of the deck, but not the illustrator whose iconic images are infamous today and anyone would recognize, or a lot of people would at least. So the illustrator is actually Pamela Coleman Smith, who, despite the enormous popularity of the deck, only ever received a one-time modest payment. And since her name was left off the box, she actually died in relative obscurity, and only kind of recently have some people been like resurfacing her name. And modern tarot decks can draw from all of this, more history that's lost to time, and also their author's own context. So for small plates, I'm working on a tarot deck that maps the stories of quantum physics to the major arcana. I was definitely interested in kind of figuring out different systems of organizing the major arcana to fit this, because it's often presented as a very strict linear journey of the Fool, which is like the zero card, to the World, which is the 21st card. And so I ended up for this project adopting from Lane Smith's interpretation from 78 Acts of Liberation and kind of creating 10 separate cards, like 1 and 10 cards that includes the tarot card of like 1, the magician, and 10, the wheel, and 19, the sun, because those digits either add up to 1 or 10, and so on and so forth. So it's being printed right now, which is exciting. This is like one of the images that got made into polymer plates. It's like the nines card. And in kind of writing this and researching physics, I just kept finding there were a lot of parallels to what stories are told and not told in both the history of tarot and physics. And many origin stories of tarot, physics, and everything else are presented as either kind of like absolute or eternal or the sole work of a genius. But as we kind of all know, it's often more nuanced. So if anybody doesn't, kind of know physics equations, usually it's E equals mc squared, which actually wasn't even how Einstein like wrote it in the original paper. It was L over m. But few people do know that like Einstein was actually a socialist and had an 800-page FBI file because of his political views. And any of the like even kind of like modern YouTube video physics I've watched often fail to mention that. And also this Why Socialism is a really great essay, so recommend it. It reads well. Um, and then advances in physics don't happen because of one person. So one of these such stories is Emmy Noether, a woman who Einstein himself called a genius. She wasn't admitted to university because the administrator considered letting women in to be the end of academics. She just kind of like sat in classes, even though she wasn't allowed. And Hilbert kind of like would like often like teach a class, name her as the assistant, and then just never show up to class. So she got to kind of teach that way. And then after publishing the paper in 1918 with this theorem, she was finally allowed to be a professor, but she wasn't even paid for the first few years of that until 1923. And any kind of like most modern day physics would consider Noether's theorem one of the most important theorems of the 21st century. And it led pretty directly to the discovery of quarks and the Higgs boson, if you're into physics. Um, and she's definitely not the only woman who was written out of the physics history. So before computers were machines, computer was a job that was performed by people who like hand did calculations, and 98% of those were women who otherwise wouldn't have been allowed into STEM. And so the most kind of famous person who was a human computer is Creole Katherine Johnson, who, if you've seen the movie Hidden Figures, kind of talks more about that. But she came up with the idea of using Euler's method to calculate the lunar landings by hand. And that's a method where you have to do very small increments because there's not like a divine formula. So it's thousands and upon thousands of very precise calculations that made the lunar landing possible. Um, and she also pioneered NASA using like actual like machine computers, despite having to steal a book on computer programming because the library wouldn't loan it to her because she was a Black woman. So I hope the small kind of taste of these stories inspires you to continue to learn more about stories like these in physics and beyond. And if you're interested, you can pick up a deck from SF Center for the book once it's printed and published. So thank you. Oh, sorry. Mhm.
Wow, thanks, Quinn. That was pretty amazing. And a lot there. I am going to share your website and Instagram with folks. And if people want to chat me questions, you can put them into the chat and I will read them to Quinn. Um, I will just get the ball rolling a little bit though to ask Quinn, like, when did you first get when did you first get really hooked on the tarot? Like, what was there a specific story or anecdote where experience you had that said, "Oh, I want to dive into this."
Yeah, I mean, it really was just like a friend was into tarot, and like I think we were both kind of like shy and introverted, and doing a reading was a good way to kind of like open up and like have some kind of like way of talking about what was going on. And then like it kind of, yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, so that was like maybe when I was like 25, 26. And then I just kind of kept meeting more people who were like into tarot. And I think I just like have always been kind of drawn to like archetypes and stories. Like I really enjoyed like Neil Gaiman's like Norse mythology, but like so it just kind of was something that I fell into that. And then, like my partner is also really into tarot. Like so it's just been kind of like a thing that's felt. But then the history was also really enticing once I kind of cracked that.
Sure. And were you? were you a history major? What were you a physics major? What you
Oh,
know?
yeah, that's a great question. I went to Hampshire College, so if anybody knows it, there's no grades and no majors. So in some ways I studied everything, and in some ways, no, I wasn't any of those majors. But yeah, I spent most of my time in the kind of like studio arts-ish classes, or I called it the School of Critical Social Inquiry, which was basically sociology, but yeah. Um, and I took a math and art studio class. That was probably like one of my favorite classes in college.
Excellent. Well, for those who aren't completely familiar, I neglected to mention earlier. Quinn is one of our small plates artists this year. We're very excited to have them participating. Um, and small plates has been going for about 12, 13 or so iterations. But then before we started the annual iteration, it's been going, I think, a little over, uh, well, 12, 13 years, somewhere in there. But um, we've done probably over almost 100 books at this point, and it's been tremendous and wonderful experience to work with. And basically, what the program is artists apply, and then once we a small plates panel here at the center, made up of different artists and community members, we will review those, and then. Once we select three, usually two or three artists to produce their editions, and they need to produce an edition of books that is 4 inches by 4 inches, and then an edition of 100 copies. So it's a really wonderful opportunity for artists to get to work in a traditional bookmaking format of making an edition, and just learning the different steps along that process. So Quinn's well into it, as you can see from the pictures. Lots of prints, lots of models, lots of paper, lots of ordering, lots of planning. It's a fun process. So um, I'm looking at the chat here, but I'm not sure if I see any questions. Did I miss anything? If anyone wants to unmute and ask a question, you're welcome to do that as well at this point.
I'll ask a lead question. Quinn, can you give us a little teaser about your small plates book structure? Is it inspired by your interest in physics, or is it more of like a traditional card deck?
Yeah, so like each of the like major arcana cards has like a physics concept or equation mapped to it. So, um, for instance, yeah, so this is like part of the deck, like that'll be made into a polymer plate. So it's like the chariot is Noether's theorem, and then temperance, or yeah, 14 is uh like just kind of in honor of Katherine Johnson, or Euler's method. So yeah, each of them will kind of have that, and then the full, like this is like a full card. So yeah, the 9 is about like Planck's length, and then the 18, or the moon, is the full standard model Lagrangian, which is really an equation that is this long. But yeah.
And also, do you want to talk a little bit about the structure that the cards will go in?
Yeah, oh sorry. And then so yeah, so they'll be loose cards, but then they'll have an accordion with like pockets. So each of them kind of goes in the pocket. So it could like be opened like an accordion book, but then you can also take out the cards and shuffle them, and then like kind of put them back in the, book container and tie it up.
Cool. Thank you. Can't wait to see it.
Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And thank you very much to Quinn. It's been really wonderful to hear some of this background. I've been looking at these cards with you for weeks now, and to hear some of this background is really tremendous. And it's great just to see a lot of the other work that's informing and going into all this, and hopefully people are going to be really excited when we do the publication party, which the date is still to be determined. We're figuring it out. There's a lot of holidays this summer that we're dodging. So we will announce that date soon. But so if we can all just say thanks and thank you to Quinn. It's wonderful to have you here today. I will also just take the moment to announce next month's guests. June's guests will be Jesslyn Ayland and Paul Morgan of Current Editions in Emeryville, California. Uh, Current Editions is a small publishing outfit that celebrates microhistories and niche artifacts. They research, design, and publish assorted ephemera, and registration will open sometime for that event in mid-May. So we look forward to seeing you all then, and thank you for joining us today from the bench.